Good evening, and a really warm welcome to everybody here and online to Ipswich Minster for the first lecture as part of our A Church for England series. Here we are seeking to create a space where we can explore what a good Church of England should look like for the nation it serves through the lens of the most vital issues of our time. It is a real pleasure and perhaps a touch of ecclesiastical diplomacy to welcome especially warmly the Right Reverend Graham Usher, the Bishop of Norwich, to Ipswich tonight. I realise that for some here this may feel a little like inviting the away team into the home dressing room, but I promise you there is no derby rivalry tonight. We'll save that for next season. Tonight, we have just a shared hope for the Church's witness in East Anglia and beyond. So a brief word of introduction to Bishop Graham. He was ordained in 1996, serving his early ministry in the Diocese of York before becoming one of the youngest rectors of Hexham Abbey in 2004. In 2014, he was consecrated as a bishop and first served in the suffragan see of Dudley in the Diocese of Worcester, before being translated to his current see as the Diocesan Bishop of Norwich in 2019. Bishop Graham is the Church of England's lead bishop for the environment and speaks on this and other issues in the House of Lords, where he is a respected voice on matters of climate, ecology and social justice, all helping to shape national policy with a pastoral heart and a prophetic edge. He is an accomplished author, having written beautifully on the relationship between faith and the natural world in books such as Place of Enchantment and The Way Under Our Feet, both inviting us to see creation not just as a backdrop, but as a sacred text. And I can especially attest to the latter being a particularly good accompanier for any pilgrimage. With a background in both ecology and theology, serving on the boards of the Human Tissue Authority and as a member of the International Commission for Anglican Orthodox Theological Dialogue, Bishop Graham brings a deep and grounded wisdom to the question at the heart of our series, and especially on tonight's topic. So please join me in giving him a very warm and graciously Ipswich welcome to Bishop Graham Usher.
Friends, it's really lovely to be with you, and Tom, thank you for your very kind words that I imagine ChatGPT created for you this afternoon. And it's a delight to be contributing to this lecture series, which is certainly very exciting and interesting in the scope that you're looking to explore over the coming months. So we're going to just go through the slides. I'll probably go like this for the next slide, if that's okay. So go for it. Every living person benefits and is dependent on nature every single day. We are a part of a highly interconnected and interdependent, diverse creation that God has intended. Biodiversity provides our food and our drink, with many plants and fruit crops dependent on insect pollination. Interestingly, I was served a drink earlier today made from oak leaves and honey, and it was decidedly delicious. The soil microbiome is essential for fertility. Diverse plant genetics are essential for agriculture. Trees provide fuel and building materials, as well as lowering the street temperature in our cities. Nature clothes us. Habitats capture and filter drinking water. Plants are the basis of our medicines. The natural world provides renewable energy, and so much more. It also brings solace and can be the arena of spiritual enlightenment. It enables us to restore our mental equilibrium. In Japan, they go forest bathing because the phytoncides and the colours in a forest do you immense good for your well-being. We see the beauty of nature around us, we pause and give thanks. And no wonder with the psalmist we can say, "Let everything that hath breath praise the Lord." We have come to know that to plant is to hope, to restore is to heal, and to protect is to love. We are both nature's guardians, though, and also its exploiters. We contribute to its protection, conservation, and restoration, with indigenous peoples in particular having a deep relationship with and profound understanding of nature and passing on important wisdom from one generation. But we are also nature's consumers, extractors, commodifiers, destroyers. And at times we hear the praise of creation and stand in awe. And at other times we intentionally perhaps block out its cry of lament because we have chosen to delude ourselves in a pursuit of perpetual economic growth, greed, and self-interest. We have become largely blind to extinction and deaf to nature's depleted songs of praise. Will it take a silent spring to wake us from what we have lost? Now, this century is marked already by unprecedented environmental challenges: climate change, deforestation, pollution, biodiversity loss, and water scarcity, amongst others. And the evidence that we have a worldwide problem of climate change and biodiversity loss is very, very clear and stark. These issues are not merely scientific or political in nature. They present profound moral and spiritual questions. Gus Speth, who was the Dean of the Yale Forestry and Environment School and a lawyer, said this: "I used to think that top global environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought with 30 years of good science we could address these problems, but I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with those, we need spiritual and cultural transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that." I believe that this is where the Christian faith and how we live our faith has something profound to say in response. Christians must rise to the occasion, offering rooted biblical principles, ethical responsibility, a prophetic voice, and practical stewardship, often through partnership, and above all with a deep thankfulness for the gift of creation. And I will return to those themes at the end of this lecture. The lecture is in 3 parts. I'm going to take you on a tour of the science very briefly, then a crash course on theology, especially where we've perhaps gone wrong, before explaining how I suggest we need to speak as Christians and as a church for England today. So the science in 4.5 minutes. Air bubbles within the ice core, deep within the Antarctic and the Greenland ice sheets, are like tiny time capsules. These cores going right down deep into the earth, as they've been laid down, have trapped the Earth's atmospheric gases. And when you drill down and pull out a deep, deep ice core, many, many meters in length, you can measure the composition of those atmospheric gases continuously for 750,000 years. A huge, long time in our record. And this is what the data shows. That there is a fluctuation. So if I just explain what we're looking at here, this is today, going back 400,000 years. And for centuries, this is what the carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere was like. And it followed a cyclical process when there was glaciation. And what we have here, we just focus on this part. Some 10,000 years ago, when we left the last ice age, we're deep in the last ice age, the amount of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere was very low. And when it's been in an interglacial period, it's been around about 280 parts per million. So at this kind of level. But what we can see here from these ice cores and the examination of them is that the carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has increased since the Industrial Revolution. Since we've started burning fossil fuels, the level of carbon dioxide in the Earth's atmosphere has gone from 280 parts per million, which it was hovering at between an ice age, right up to over 400 parts per million today. Now you can see that the graph is going nowhere it has been in the last 400,000 years. We're performing an incredibly dangerous experiment on ourselves, the like of which we have never seen before. The data shows that global temperature, as a result, is changing. And this next slide shows how the temperature, the average annual temperature of the globe, is changing over the period from 1750 onwards. You see where we are today, and the forward line into the deeper red is showing an even darker image. Last year was the hottest year on record at breaking the 1.5 degree threshold, which we've heard so much about. That, of course, is the landmark Paris Agreement threshold of holding the average global temperature to below 2 degrees centigrade, but pursuing every effort to limit it to not increase above 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial levels. So we're not any longer even following that which was being hoped for only a few years ago at the Paris Agreement. Friends, the hard reality is that we're already facing climate change, this global existential threat. It's no longer just a threat, it's a lived experience for a great many people. And its impact is worst in the most economically challenged parts of the world, amongst the poorest of the world, who cannot afford to be resilient, cannot afford adaptation and to change. And yet, when we look at the emissions that, on the next slide, of what different people, so this is the global average temperature. This is saying much the same sort of thing in terms of where the global average temperature is going, and you can see the graph is all going in what I regard as the wrong direction. So who is pumping all this carbon into the atmosphere? I've already said that it's disproportionately affecting the poorest people around the world, our poorest nations. But let's look on the next slide where the emitters are coming from. And I think this graph is so illustrative. The darker the colour means the more carbon per capita that is being put into the atmosphere in that part of the world. And if you correlate this map with where in the world the most extreme climate change is happening, what would you see? The most extreme climate change is happening in those parts of the world that are the least inputters of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. So the average tons per person on this earth released into the atmosphere is 4.8 tons per year. We're just fractionally ahead of that at 5 tons per person. So each of you and me, we put about 5 tons of carbon into the atmosphere every year. But Australia is 3 times higher at 15 tons per year. The US is 14.2 tons per year. South Korea, 12 tons per year. But if you live in Rwanda, one of the poorest countries in the world, where climate change is already having a disastrous impact, you perhaps put 0.12 tons of carbon into the atmosphere. So it takes 125 Rwandans emitting carbon into the air to match what one Australian puts into the air. 125 Rwandans to one Australian. This simply acknowledges and exacerbates the great global inequalities that we have. But it has other impacts that I'll come on to. I'm haunted, as the next slide shows, by the Bishop of Vanuatu, who during a conversation at the Lambeth conference said to me, "My islands are sinking and you're doing absolutely nothing to help me." Of course, there's much in those words, and I've always thought myself of sea levels rising, as they are in Norfolk. We'll soon, in the next 100 years, we'll lose the Norfolk Broads. Great Yarmouth Minster will become the municipal swimming pool. I don't know quite how high above sea level you are here. But if you're a small island nation, this sense of your islands sinking into the sea, your wells becoming salinated, the movement of people away from uninhabited places, the conflict that migration brings, is all too real. And furthermore, we've not just got climate change to be worried about, the very health and vitality of our planet is declining. And this next slide shows, and you probably can't see the detail, but what it's showing is the decline in the Earth's biodiversity in each region. Global wildlife populations have declined by 69% on average in just my lifetime, so since 1970. Though in some regions of the world, that is far worse. Worldwide, 1 million plants and animals are threatened. Different species are threatened with extinction. And the UK is one of the most nature-depleted countries in the world. As the next slide will show, the biodiversity change in priority species is on a falling graph curve. We've lost 97% of wildflower meadows in this country since the 1930s. 70% of our ancient woodland has been lost or damaged. 492 species have been lost in England since the 1800s. And as the next slide comes up, when a species becomes extinct by human action, or when it's threatened with extinction, we are damaging God's creation. We harm and reduce the diversity of expression of God's creation. We disturb the infinite interconnectability of ecosystems that exist in a sensitive balance. The song of creation is somehow depleted. The song of praise of God by all creation is depleted as each species goes. And climate change is in this vicious cycle that shows a cycle of extreme weather events which results in the destruction of homes and livelihoods, of land for food production, of communities. The loss of biodiversity also impacts human well-being. And in turn, all of this vicious cycle leads to reduced quantity of resources, increasing competition for those resources. And when there's increasing competition, people start to go on the move with migration, looking for resources. Conflicts begin, wars start over the scarcity of resources. There's more migration, more scarce resources. Most of the future wars of the next 100 years will probably be fought over natural resources, and particularly over water. The future is bleak. So in the second part of this talk, how can we speak some hope into it? St. Augustine of Hippo said this: "Hope has two beautiful daughters. Their names are anger and courage. Anger at the way things are, and courage to see that they do not remain as they are." A theology of climate change and biodiversity justice must hold together both this anger and courage. Anger that things are not as they should be, that things are out of kilter when the poorest and most vulnerable are impacted the most. And yet also to have courage to have a prophetic voice, and courage to hear the prophetic voice first ourselves and make the changes that we need to make, but also to hear the prophetic voice of the poorest people of the world, of the indigenous people of the world. Living more simply so that others, including the whole of creation, might simply live. But I would suggest we've failed in 4 key areas. And I guess that slide's not great to see at the back, I'm sorry, so I'll say what each of the things are. First of all, I think we've got a common failure of not truly appreciating that creation is God's work, an overflow of God's goodness, an outpouring of God's love, of all that is good. Creation is an act of love for the good of others whom God chooses to lovingly create. Thus, the whole of creation belongs to God, not to us. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the psalmist calls out. And living with any sense of dominion and tilling and keeping needs to always remember that creation, nature, is a gift to us from God. Secondly, we have sinned. We've damaged ourselves, other people, and creation, both in deliberate and malicious ways, but also ignorantly and unintentionally. Sin frustrates God's purpose affecting our relationship with God, with our neighbours, including our all creation neighbours. We have not allowed, in the words of the prophet Amos, for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an everlasting stream. We have wrecked and vandalized shalom. Thirdly, we've yet to appreciate that salvation involves the whole of creation, of the restoration of good relationships between people and between people and the rest of creation. Just remember that great hymn at the start of Colossians, speaking of the cosmic reconciliation of all things in Christ. And fourthly, we've failed in rekindling a sense of responsibility, a shared responsibility, not a right over creation, but our focus should be focused on bringing about healing where there is unhealthy relationships, restoring broken relationships. For when a relationship is flawed or broken, our relationship with God is also impaired. I have been struck by how heavily these four areas lie in the hearts of so many young people. Each summer, I take a group from the Diocese of Norwich for a week's pilgrimage to Tizé, the religious community in France. You'll know many of their chants. And most evenings after evening prayer, I share with the brothers in a ministry of listening. So this is at sort of 9:30, 9:45 at night, and we listen to young people from across Europe for a couple of hours. And I'm always struck when listening to young adults from across Europe just how much eco-anxiety there is. They're questioning whether they should bring children into the world. They're worried and scared about the threats that there are. And they want to see their churches taking the environment seriously. This study by Tearfund and Youthscape, talking to Christians aged 14 to 19, found that 9 out of 10 young people are concerned about the climate crisis, but only 1 out of 10 think their churches are doing enough about it. And I believe that the Church of England's Environment Programme, which our net zero ambition is a part, can speak into this, as well as being more aligned with our evangelistic work. Because the care of creation is deeply attractive to children and young people. If we're serious as a church of growing younger and more diverse, an environmental programme in every church or deanery will attract the young to be part of it. And that also reminds us that the climate and biodiversity crises are not just injustices with the present generation, but also future generations. Our children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, who will inherit a world with less nature, more places that are uninhabitable for everyday life, more instability caused by environmental migration, conflict, and war. Now, the Anglican Communion has been responding to many of these issues, and I had the great privilege last year of leading a wonderful group, small group of Anglicans from around the world to COP16, the biodiversity COP. And I wanted, as part of this delegation, to have people from the Global South, young people and Indigenous people. And I wanted to be the oldest on the delegation. And I had the most fantastic group, 5, 6 of us, including an Indigenous woman from Tonga, who spoke with immense wisdom. And when you got her in a room with some senior government officials and people from the UN, she had something profound to say. And the fifth mark of mission of the Anglican Communion contains the focus of our action, safeguarding the integrity of creation and sustaining and renewing the life of the earth. But each of the marks of mission speak in to this topic. Our environmental projects, campaigns, and prophetic voice can generate the goodwill, the social capital, and the trusted relationships for people to hear the good news of Christ. Indeed, they help us to live out the mandate of the Great Commission, to tell, proclaim the good news to all creation, says Matthew. We teach, baptize, and nurture new believers within the context of ecological breakdown, making connections and teaching a Jesus-shaped way of being. And we tend to human need by loving service, knowing that the need is increasing due to environmental impacts. And we seek to transform unjust structures because in Jesus we find the one who identifies fully with the human condition. And just as you did it for the least of these, you did it for me. The created world, as we read in the book of Genesis, is described by God at its culmination as very good. It is the fullness of all that God has made, with the Sabbath being the culmination, the crown of all creation, a pause, a breath, a taking stock. When we enter into that Sabbath pause, we begin to notice things. We begin to pay attention. When we slow ourselves down, we start to see. I'm currently writing a book about the 18th century parson naturalist Gilbert White of Selborne, whose great thing was paying attention to the natural history of his parish in Hampshire. But the problem is we face a digital age, which means that our attention is forever being competed for. Apps and adverts want to capture our attention. They're greedy for it. Attention is baked into the software of all these things we carry in our pockets. Interruption has become normalized by the buzz in our pocket. Banksy, the street artist, captured this in his 2014 artwork called Mobile Lovers, which appeared on a wall in Bristol. We have become a distracted people, not even paying attention to each other, let alone the natural environment. Because what we attend to or decide not to attend to is at the root of what we love and desire. If we no longer attend to nature as we once did, no longer see what is precious, is that why we seem to not notice its destruction or to be indifferent to its loss? But those of us who do attend to the natural world and see it as less vibrant than in our youth, noticing fewer butterflies and birdsong, need to reckon with a deep sense of loss. I'm very excited this evening because I had an email on the train coming up from London to say that the swallowtails have hatched at one of the fens in the Broads. So sometime over this weekend, I've got to squeeze in, just for my own joy and delight, 3 or 4 hours when it's sunny, to go and watch swallowtails dancing in the Norfolk Broads. But will we still see them in 10, 20, 50 years' time? One of the most iconic and beautiful butterflies in this country. Might mining the skills of contemplation rekindle a life-enhancing way of looking at the world and our connectivity with it, rather than the life-denying, life-destroying way which we are so complicit within. The life of Jesus was one of paying attention. And I want to just see how that paying of attention is so important. Douglas Christie argues that in an age of ecological crisis, the very fabric of life continues to fray and tear. The need for us to be able to apprehend the whole, to see all things as existing in intimate relationship with one another, has never been more necessary. And when we turn the pages of Scripture and we encounter Jesus, we see how he pays attention and notices the hungry and the hemorrhaging, the lepers and the lame. And he told stories about those who paid attention, such as the Samaritan man who responds to the cry of need. He it is who says, "Beware, keep alert, keep awake. What I say to you, I say to all, pay attention." He noticed the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, the different types of soil, the growth of seeds, the choking of thistles, and the fruitfulness of trees. And as well as asking us to pay attention to the needs around us, he also taught us in the Lord's Prayer to ask God to give us today our daily bread. He does not promise you or me a whole Greg's full of bread at our disposal. He simply commands us to pray, "Give us today our daily bread," that which is enough. He is the provider of the bread for the meal at the table and the bread at the Eucharistic feast. We pray for our daily bread, not my daily bread, thus confronting the individualism of our consumer culture. And yet, so often, we are using up more resources than we need. There's a thing called Earth Overshoot Day, and this is worked out every year. And this is the day of the year on which humanity's resource consumption for the year exceeds the Earth's capacity to regenerate those resources. Back in the 1970s, that date was towards the end of December. So just for a few days each year, back in the 1970s, we were exceeding what the Earth had produced or could regenerate. And that date has steadily come forward each year. This year, it falls on the 24th of July. So please remember the 24th of July, because from that day, everything that you eat, you drink, you wear, that comes from the natural world, is borrowing forward from the future. And when we look at some of the figures around how globally 45% of all meat and fish is eaten by the world's fifth richest people. The fifth richest people of the world consume 58% of our energy. The fifth poorest group of people, only 4%. The fifth wealthiest people consume 84% of all paper. The poorest fifth, only 1%. The fifth wealthiest people in the world have 87% of the world's vehicles. The poorest fifth in the world, less than 1/5. And I believe that the Church of England can meaningfully contribute to the shared task of Tikkun Olam, the joining in with a mending of the world. So this is now my final part of this lecture. I would suggest that there are a number of ways, 5 ways, where we could focus our thoughts to be a church for England. First of all, to be able to have a robust foundational ecological theology, which affirms the intrinsic value of the natural world, welling out of our scriptures, the ancient traditions of the church, and our scientific understanding. Because science and theology, despite popular rumour, are good interlocutors. They're not enemies. And that deep theological reflection should be resourcing our preaching and our teaching and our decision-making, our utterances in the public square, something that I aim often rather badly at doing in interventions in the House of Lords. And we do it because we face a great wall of climate skeptics and deniers. The sooner the world ends, the better, because Jesus will return, predictors. And that we need more priests, not heat pumps, naysayers, all of whom are in many of our parish churches. We need to be able to have a robust defence and a way of speaking in our nation about environmental issues which are deeply rooted in the triune God, so that we can encourage people on what Pope Francis called an ecological conversion. The second area is to be formed, and I use that word very deliberately, to be formed in the ethical and moral imperative in each Christian person to love our neighbour, both human and other species, and to seek justice. Justice is a recurring theme in the scriptures. The prophets condemn nations for their exploitation of the land and the poor. And so we see the words of Amos coming to life. How can we live these words in our interactions as a church for England? This, of course, will involve prophetically challenging these systems, advocating for policies and practices that uphold environmental justice, that in ways that take our congregations with us. And remember that, in a sense, none of this is new. William Temple, a great wartime Archbishop of Canterbury, who convened the famous Malvern Conference to reimagine Britain after the Second World War, from which the welfare state and the NHS emerged, wrote in his 1942 Christianity and Social Order, "The fundamental source of all wealth is land. All wealth is a product of human labour expending upon God's gifts, and these gifts are bestowed in the land, what it contains and what it nourishes. We must recover reverence for the earth and its resources, treating it no longer as a reservoir of potential wealth to be exploited, but as a storehouse of divine bounty on which we utterly depend." How prophetic William Temple was being back in 1942 in a little Penguin classic book that kept being reprinted. And I've got a copy of the 1942 edition, and inside it says to leave it at a post office when you've read it, so it can be sent to the front for the men to read. It lays out what Temple was hoping these men would return to. And as the father of a soldier who's just been on the Ukrainian border, and knowing the huge risks that we face about defence in the coming year, perhaps we need to reimagine more, as William Temple did, about the type of Britain we would like to live in. Thirdly, transformative living. Through our discipleship, we have an incredible way of engaging with our parishes. Parish church is the hope for Britain, I believe. And our parish churches can be great symbols of living out a simpler life, as Pope Francis calls it, living simply on this single island planet home of ours. Weaving eco-church into the whole life of our parishes and chaplaincies, rather than leaving it to those cliched sandal-wearing tree huggers. Reducing our waste, conserving energy, supporting ethical products, organising community cleanups, tree planting, etc. I don't know. Is Ipswich Minster working towards being an eco-church? Good. The environmental crisis is a call to creative action, taking our environmental responsibility seriously, a response using all our abilities. Fourthly, we need to do this in partnership. And we need to do it in partnership with other faith communities, with other denominations. Pope Francis has been such a leader in this whole area, with his stunningly beautiful encyclical published in 2015, Laudate Si, but also His All Holiness the Ecumenical Patriarch Bartholomew, known in the Orthodox world as the Green Patriarch, has been prophetic in his witness to tread gently on this, our single island planet home. And finally, I would say that as a church for England, we need to be a people of thankfulness. Every Eucharistic gathering is a thankfulness to God for all that the Father has made, for all things, both visible and invisible, and declaring it as good, indeed, very good. Our response can only be to thank God for the many gifts he bestows on us and the rest of creation, without which none of us would continue to exist. As Meister Eckhart said, if the only prayer I ever make is thank you, that is enough. And that's something that NGOs and governments can't do and don't do. But we can, because it's literally ingrained with Eucharistic bread in our very DNA. How can we be a thankful people? In the early pages of Genesis, we encounter God walking in a garden. And one of the most beautiful lines in Scripture, it says, in the cool of the evening breeze. At the very end of the Bible, the new creation is outlined in the book of Revelation, noticing that the leaves of the trees will be for the healing of the nations. We are part of that creation. We will only flourish as human beings if nature truly flourishes. Too often, I think, we're human doings rather than human beings. How can we truly be with nature rather than do to it all the time? A church for England has a duty to hold all of that at the heart of its prayer, to model it, to speak out about it, and above all, to live it. Because responding well to the climate and biodiversity crises is, I believe, not an option for the ministry of God's church. It's an imperative for the mission of God's church. Thank you.
so much for a masterful tour, I think, through the chapters, the hope, and our path as Christians before us. You've enlightened us with science, with theology, and I think also in there too, a theology of the science. And so thank you very much for such a rich lecture. We now have some time for questions from the audience, and I will bring round this microphone so everyone can hear. Do we have any first questions? Father John.
Bishop Graham, I echo what Father Tom has just said. It was a wonderful, in the true sense, compassionate and masterly address. And I apologise that the first question may sound as though it's a personal criticism. It's, as much as anything else, something with which I wrestle myself. You spoke of going to see the swallowtails for yourself. My sister and her husband loved to go to Vietnam to watch the birds. Now, they could do that on a television screen. My own hobby is travelling Europe by rail, but I have first to get to rail. And I notice that whenever I go to a clerical gathering, which is quite frequently, the first topic of conversation is, where are you going for your holiday? And there's almost a suspicion that if I'm just going to Norwich, dare I say, that's a bit of a cop-out. Surely I should be saying something exotic. And similarly,
Norwich is very exotic. It's far more exotic than Ipswich.
Indeed, but you understand the point I make.
Yeah.
And of course, both of us live in dioceses which have a wealth of holiday homes, and the A12 and the A11 every weekend see people pouring up to them. It is something with which I wrestle. Should I not be staying at home and not adding to all the carbon that my car journeys, and I'm a great public transport man, my train journeys and air flights produce? I hope you understand what I'm not criticising you personally, but I think it's something that with which all church people should wrestle.
Yeah, I think you ask a very right ethical question for each of us to think of. Because with the era of cheap airfares, it is very cheap to go somewhere. And yet, it is so cheap, but we're not counting the full cost of that. So the price is cheap, but the costs can be huge. So I would just appeal and ask people to reflect, is it 4 cruises a year or is it 1? Or cruising is actually one of the most carbon-intensive types of holiday to go on, and the most wasteful in terms of the amount of food from those never-ending, I've never been on one, but these never-ending buffets that people seem to enjoy. So I just simply ask people to reflect on what for them would be appropriate. Now, my wife and I have gone by ferry or by train to, if we've gone abroad on holiday. We tend to go on holiday in this country, but that's just a choice, and it's partly because of money as well. I don't want to stop people seeing and delighting in the natural world, and I will expend some carbon going to see these swallowtail butterflies, because yeah, and I think there's lots of questions about the fact that our public transport in this country is not where it could be, and if you travel in Germany or somewhere, the whole rail infrastructure is much more built for that. There's lots of ways in which we could support people to use public transport and look at alternative ways. But I don't want to be a sort of boring naysayer and say you have to stay at home. We need to also enjoy and delight, but how do we do all that in moderation and with care?
I'm a bit reluctant to dive straight into British politics, but nevertheless, we heard some ideas from the government yesterday, and presumably both in your sort of public role and as a private person, you must have felt some degree of encouragement in what you heard. I know there's a matter of delivery, and I know it needs more countries, but possibly we heard something a bit better than we have been used to hearing.
I think in the spending review yesterday, the Chancellor said some positive things about energy supply, and I'd be interested to hear what people in Suffolk make of Sizewell C. I think there's quite a split, from what I pick up, split views on that. There was more money for ELMS, for farming, for environmental land management schemes over the next period, but less money for DEFRA. So it seems as if nature recovery and regulation of nature recovery and flood defences is a less priority because the real term money in real terms is not staying, it's going down over this next period for DEFRA. So I think it was a mixed picture yesterday, and part of it will be looking at the detail within that. And I was in the House of Lords this afternoon. I was doing other things, so I haven't yet read all the briefing from yesterday.
You'll be aware that King's College, Cambridge took the decision to actually put solar panels over King's College Chapel, which is obviously one of the most iconic chapels in the whole country. How precious do you think the Church of England should be about transforming its estate to, say, put solar panels or heat pumps or insulation, all those things? How precious should it be about its ancient buildings?
I should declare an interest, and I chaired the Net Zero Carbon Board for a period between two secondary church estates commissioners. So I was leading that part of the Church of England's programme. And it is a very exciting piece of work. It's trying to fulfil the General Synod ambition of being net zero by 2030. We will never get there, but it's given us great impetus to get going, and there's lots of really good projects, parishes that are really reviewing this and how you both heat a person rather than heat the whole building, because you don't have them here, but so many churches I go in have the sort of infrared things halfway up the walls, and if you stand in the right position, you feel you've had you get a tan from Tenerife by the end of the Eucharist, and want to do the other side, but a lot of the heat is going up to, in Norfolk, heat the angels in the angel roofs. And so we've got to think this through carefully. How do we perhaps heat the person more than the whole building? And there are various things such as heated seat cushions that you plug in, and people, as they arrive at church, take one. They sit there, there's toasties, and then you can hug them, or you can sit on them, or you can stick them somewhere, but keep you warm. Doing simple repairs like reducing drafts and broken windows can make a very big difference to the heating in a church. But certainly for the larger interventions, and I would say those larger interventions need to be for churches that are being used every single day of the week and needing heat. There's no point making a large intervention to a small rural church, which is perhaps used once a month. They may as well go onto a renewable energy tariff. That would be the best thing they possibly could do. But a church that is used every day of the week, having solar panels, and we have got hundreds and hundreds of south-facing roofs on our churches, and they're the longer roofs of the south-facing ones with our west-east access. And King's College, Cambridge has been a game changer about this, because now we can quote it on every faculty application. The chancellors of dioceses, are taking note of this and realising, It was a brave decision to make. Now, it is helped that it's got a parapet wall, so from down on King Street in Cambridge, I gather you can't see the solar panels because it's quite a flattish, the roof's not got a huge, not like this one, it's sort of more flatter. But it has been a game changer. We've put solar panels now on the roof of St Peter Mancroft Church in Norwich, and St Stephen's Norwich is just going through the faculty process, a medieval church right in the centre of Norwich. And those solar panels will be seen from the ground. And so it's actually turning it around and saying, every generation of our parish churches have added to them the latest technology and the latest building styles and things like that. If you've got some of the medieval churches in Norfolk, you can see they've been outdoing their neighbours in having the best this or the best porch or the best rainwater gargoyles or something, because they believed it all got years off purgatory for them. We're still paying to keep them out of purgatory, but they're in. This is just simply our generation's addition. And if we want our churches to be sustainable into the future, this is one way of going about it. So St Peter Mancroft Church are saving £4,000 a year on their heating bill because of the solar panels. I did go up to bless the solar panels on Peter Mancroft Church, and a lovely member of the public saw me and rang 999. And when I came down the spiral staircase, I was met by 2 police officers who said that 999 had been rung by a concerned member of the public who'd seen a youth on the roof stealing lead. The youthful Bishop of Norwich was the headline.
More questions? Yes.
Can I ask a really big question, which you're in a position to answer being in the House of Lords, but it does seem that we are, perhaps in the Western world or perhaps in the entire world, obsessed with growth. Big furore today that the economic growth in the UK was down by 0.3%. How can we change the sort of mindset almost of the world, bearing in mind your very persuasive graph about Earth Overshoot Day? We can't keep growth going. Surely we have to talk more about sustainability. Even in the Diocese of St Ed's and Ips, we are talking about, have been for the last 10 years, a strategy of growth. We surely need to be talking more sustainability and less about forever growing things.
I think we also need to be speaking about circular economies, and because I think these are really quite interesting. When you see that World Overshoot or Earth Overshoot Day, it's a lot of that overshoot that is going to landfill, that is not being adequately used, is heat that is being wasted. Why do we have a boiler in all our houses rather than perhaps a district heating system? If we're going to be really, I think we've got to think of some really radical things here. The amount of stuff we throw in the bin, the amount of packaging and use of single-use plastics that there are. As a church, one of the challenges that you might want to get rid of all single-use plastic in church. There's a challenge for you. That you just decide as a church, you're just not going to have single-use plastic. The circular economy still provides into the GDP, but it's using the waste products and that which is thrown away or not utilised back into the economy. And I think there's more that needs to be explored there, because we're like a leaky bucket that, the resources that we have leak out of this bucket and we're left with a sort of sludge at the bottom, whereas there's so much that could be utilised for gain. But I think also it's about what is the ethos of a company or a business or an individual in terms of what is the profit that they're looking for? Is it a financial figure at the bottom of their balance sheet? Or is their profit actually about the well-being of their staff, of the well-being of their supply chain? If you are a chocolate company, how are you ensuring the well-being of habitats in Ghana and the workers in Ghana that grow the cocoa beans? And I would love us to be, just as fair trade did, particularly about human well-being, to have a greater sense of ecological well-being in the choices that we make. And so it starts to become, for companies, more a priority, and this is not about greenwashing, but a real priority that to be a flourishing company means that we take the environment really important, and that is kind of added to our bottom line.
So we've probably got time for one more question. We'll have a chance to speak to Bishop Graham over drinks after this. So just one more question.
Speaking and interacting with lots of young people in my job and working in schools, I often have that thing of they just get that overwhelm of there's too much, they're one small person, nothing that they feel they can do, they see can make a difference. What one thing would you say to one of those young people?
Go and see, they'll experience some moment of wonder. And that might be, in this church, in the churchyard around here, you can see wonder if you look really closely. There'll be birds here, there'll be leaves unfolding, no doubt all sorts of unmentionable moments of wonder as well. But I still remember as a sort of 15-year-old, 16-year-old doing my O-levels and doing a project on sundews, which are an insectivorous plant, and looking down a high-powered microscope at the chloroplasts. And I still remember that moment of utter wonder. And we've lost awe and wonder so much from our lives. I remember as an inner city vicar in Middlesbrough, taking young people from Middlesbrough out onto the North York Moors and taking them on a night walk and all lying down and looking up at the stars, because in the centre of Middlesbrough with the light pollution you couldn't see the stars, but just to see and look at the awesome wonder, to quote a hymn. I want to sort of inspire young people around the simple joy of the natural world. And I think that then motivates them to want to protect it. But also, what are the most common words that Jesus says to us? As we turn the pages of the scriptures, what are the most common words he says? They're the words, do not be afraid. And somehow we need to speak about a hope-filled realism, that there is time to change. If there is a will, there's time to change. And one of the great prophets of our era is King Charles. And he has developed a whole thing called Harmony, and there's going to be a film next year on Amazon Prime about his whole sense of harmony with nature and with people in a multi-faith world. And he speaks incredibly passionately about the fact that there is time still to change. But we're running out of that time really fast. So, when you're voting, vote for nature. Vote as if you're hazelnut stuffed dormouse about to vote. You know, what would be best for the environment? Because we are in a very challenging situation around the world. You know, Trump's election is a disaster for the environment. It's a disaster for marginalised people. It's a disaster for the climate. Because it's all about want, now, rather than a Christian ethic, which is seeing nature as gift. Gift not just for us, but for the future. And a gift that we share with the whole of creation on this single island planet home.
Bishop Graham, thank you very much. That's been just extraordinarily rich. You've offered us some challenge, some tips. I really hope I'm not now going to be replaced by a heat pump.
ChatGPT would be a lot cheaper.
Thank you very much for coming all this way. We do have a gift for you just under the sound booth that Jim might be able to grab out, just to say as a token of our thanks. I'm afraid it's in a blue bag. We couldn't find a green and yellow one locally.
I don't think there are any locally.
I think it's outlawed in Ipswich. But to hear just a bottle of something and a book voucher as a token of thanks. Can we give Bishop Graham one more round?
Good to be with you.
Drinks are served.